and we had one computer, a research machines to the A to Z for everybody doing anything with computing. So it's nice to see things have improved since then in terms of equipment. So yeah, with one computer, and I kind of started working on that computer with my friend. We still got the job of the computer used to live in a cupboard, and every morning it was our job to get in early and get the computer from the cupboard, load the operating system on it, and put it into the classroom when it will be used. And then it was our job again to take the computer back to its sleeping place at night. So that's kind of the way we did things. Then as a little collie, very exciting. But it actually meant I had loads of access to the computer, because the teachers trusted me to move the computer around, so if it wasn't being used, I had first dibs on it with my mate. And the first thing, of course, we did is write games on it. So there you go. Shall we get started? Or
yeah, for sure, we're recording now. There's a few people that are coming in, but I think just may as well start. So.
Okay, so first of all, my name is Richard Leinfellner. Hopefully this will be quite interactive, so please just put your hand up, speak, whatever. I'd like to get some feedback on things. So you want to get into games business, presumably, in games. Who wants to get into games business? Hands up for that. Okay. So hopefully my talk is focused on that, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. I asked a question earlier about food. Okay, what do you see here? Okay, this is the vegetarian option, by the way. That's cabbage. What do you see?
Fancy food.
Fancy food, right? What's the purpose of food? Give you energy, right?
Enjoyment.
Food, but food gives you energy. It gives you enjoyment, right? So one of the questions asked earlier, who likes nice food? Nice food is probably more enjoyable than not so nice food. You get the part to say you can get the same calories just out of a shake, couldn't you? Then out of a nice meal, but a nice meal is nice. It's got textures, colours, presentation. But food has you have a need for food. Yeah. One of the things you've got to realise, there's no need for video games at all. None. You don't need video games to live. They're purely an optional extra in people's lives. So when you think about getting into the business, it's well worth thinking about the fact you're working on something that's entirely optional. It's not one of the necessities. So therefore, the only thing that's going to get your game played over somebody else's game is presentation. It's not the calories. Nobody needs the calories in video games. The other thing you think about this, I asked you about who likes to cook. There was a few hands went up for cooking. Yeah? With your chef's hat on, what do you see? Don't think as a diner, think as a chef. If you're making this, what would you see? What do you think the challenges are in this?
Well, personally, I don't like my meat that pink.
Okay.
So kind of looks good for me.
Yeah, but you're not doing it for yourself. That's the other thing as a chef. You're cooking it for other people, right? So you're not the audience. The people eating your food is the audience. The same way as you make video games, the people playing them are your audience, not you. So I take your point. You would not make this for yourself. But if somebody orders a rare steak, that's what you'll make. Yeah? So with that in mind, what do you think the challenges are with this as a chef?
I guess mainly presentation.
Yeah, it's nicely presented, You notice there's different colours.
Yeah.
It's clearly going to have different textures based on what you see. There's a sheen and a gloss to things that make it look fresh. Right? There's a nice amount of browning. Yeah? All of these things are very deliberate. Right? Same applies to the cabbage. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen cabbage look this good, quite frankly. This is amazingly good looking cabbage. How much does a cabbage cost?
Varies, typically not that much.
Yeah, it's cheap food, isn't cabbage? How much do you think this costs?
It's a lot. That's a triple A piece of steak.
No, I mean the cabbage one.
Oh. 20 pounds.
Yeah, I reckon it's probably 14 quid or something. That's probably a 14 quid or maybe 20 quid as a main course and maybe 14 quid as a starter. Right? So these bits here, the two-tone gravy, the two-tone sauce or juice, right? the presentation of charring on it, the little strips of probably bits of onion on it, right? And the cheese has taken it from being 80 pence to being 14 quid. Now, I know this is very abstract, but think about that as you think about making games. Okay, so about me, here's some of the games I've worked on. My very first game I made, actually lies on my first game. I'll come back to my first game in a minute. First game was Cauldron. Does anyone know what this is? What's this? It's a cassette tape, right? Tape inside, okay? Lots of little noises, and if you're interested, that's the story of the game inside the box. It's one of the first games I made. Actually, the first game I made before that was Evil Dead, right? Which I don't have a box for. But it's this game here. I ended up being in the games business by a total fluke. I had a friend who I went to school with in Hounslow, and he worked in the shop selling computers and games and renting videotapes. And he was going to see his family. He was going to see his family for some holidays. So he wanted somebody, his own words, to keep his job safe. And what he meant by this, he wanted somebody who would only take his job for the summer months and then go away again so he can have his job back when he gets back from India. So I volunteered to do this, and as I was working in the shop, I realised we were selling lots of games. Has anyone heard of Jeff Minter? Crack the Newton Camels? He was a big star. His mum used to come in with cassettes, box of cassettes like this, and sell us the games. And one day I said to my boss, I said, wow, we sell a lot of games. We should make some. We should make games. He was, well, why? So well, we sell lots of games, plus the company I worked for was a company called Palace, right? And Palace was the company that was formed out of Virgin when Richard Branson split with his previous partners. So they split, and half the company went off and started Palace, and Richard Branson kept Virgin. And the one thing they weren't allowed to do at Palace was make music, because that was Virgin. So they did videos. So by being part of Palace, we had access to video game rights. And one of those rights was The Evil Dead. So really, to make The Evil Dead, all we had to do is make a call to Sam Raimi and say, hey Sam, have you heard of video games? He goes, no. Do you mind if I make a game of it? No. And that was the whole conversation, and we started making Evil Dead. I taught myself programming and basically made this game. Follow-up game, this was done with me and my boss, doing everything by hand. By the follow-up game, we realized we're not, we didn't have, I could program, but my boss couldn't do art for toffee. So we decided to look for an artist, and we hired a guy called Steve Brown. And one day I was talking to Steve, and Steve said to me, there was two types of games then. It was sideways scrolling games like Scramble or Defender, and there were platform games like Manic Miner. And Steve said to me, why is there these two different types of games? So there's no reason, you can make a game with both. And that was the genesis of Cauldron. We made a game that combined scrolling, sideways scrolling, and platform games in one game. It hadn't been done before. That's how we made Cauldron. Then Steve watched Conan the Barbarian, and he was very smitten by Arnie. So at that point, we thought getting a license for Conan is too expensive, so we've just mimicked it and called it Barbarian. Right? So, and the rest the teams got bigger and bigger. More recently, I've been running a company called Streambid, where we make gamified auction software, like live bidding for auctions, selling valuables, but we gamify the bidding process. So this is kind of drawing my games experience to do that. I've also made some hardware devices. I made a steering system for yachts, which basically puts a little LED in the middle in the sky at night time to show you what the North Star would be if you could see it through the clouds. And I've also done a project for the Royal Air Force, which is essentially, if you look on the website, there's a Tempest plane, and you can look around the systems on the Tempest. I did that. Again, using my games to do it. So the reason I'm telling you this is, these are not linked to games, but they all use the experience I got being a games programmer. So sometimes your career can take a different path. Okay. So self-taught 8-bit programmer. lots of game credits. I now lecture and run companies. Now that's me just after we started Palace. This is around Cauldron time here. That's Palace Software. That's Steve Brown, the guy I worked with to do Cauldron. Okay, so if you're looking to get in the games business, you've got to separate creation from consuming, right? Consuming stuff is fun, but it doesn't matter how much you consume, it doesn't necessarily make you a good creator, right? Most really good creators have an extra little special thing in their heads that makes them creators. So, can anyone guess what that little thing is? That little thing a creator has that a consumer might not have?
Imagination, I guess.
Imagination, yeah, that's so trying to think out, let's use this horrible term, but think outside the box. You think about something that hasn't quite been done before.
Just ideas.
Yeah, ideas. So ideas are, I think people who play games can have ideas, but there's a big difference between the creator having an idea and the consumer having an idea. Say for example you're playing a game and the level is very difficult and it's very hard to beat the level. The solution for the consumer would be to make the level easier. That may be the wrong solution because it's actually the difficulty that creates the challenge for the player. You see what I mean? The creator thinks kind of, okay, what experience do I want people to have? And then a really good creator, again, if the level is too hard, maybe I'll allow 3 paths through the level. One is for the speed player that just likes to get through the level as quickly as possible. One of them is for the person who just likes to collect items, and the third one is for the person who wants to find every single secret in the level. I've now got 3 difficulty levels for the same level that will please 3 different types of consumers. And that's the way the creator thinks.
That's what we did for Mario.
Sorry?
That's what we did for
Exactly. And that's why Nintendo is so good. Some companies are really, really good at this. If you look at something like Lego Batman, or if you look at Telltale, Lego Batman and those games, they're beautifully constructed. They have that pathway. Angry Birds has the same thing. You can literally blitz through Angry Birds really quickly, or you can complete and finish everything. It's quite hard. So that's the difference between creators and consumers. They think how the different people consume, what are different consumption patterns. Okay, so let's take this scene here. I'm going to break this scene down. Modeling. Okay, modeling is basically putting a 3D model together. I don't know if you do modeling here, but it's basically the vertices, right, that make up the model, and typically they're split down into triangles. Does anyone know why we use triangles? Why do we use triangles? Pop quiz if you're a mathematically inclined person.
Yeah.
You have a piece of paper.
I think Asa's going to try and answer your question.
Go on.
So the faces are flat.
Yeah, perfectly. I don't need a piece of paper now, it's just I can demonstrate it. With a quad, right, a rectangle or a square, I could end up with the square like this. It's not flat, and that makes lighting difficult, right, because there's curvature. If I break this, if I might try and make this into a triangle, which is going to be tricky because it's not a square, if I make it a triangle, imagine this bit is gone away. If this is a bad triangle, right? In Euclidean space, which is flat space, right? I'm not talking about black holes now with non-Euclidean space, but in flat space, a triangle is always flat. There's no way I can make it bent. It's always going to be a flat shape. And that makes lighting easier. Because to light a triangle, I just need to project a normal out of this. If I've heard the term normal, project a normal out of the surface, and that's how I can light it. That's where we use triangles. Nice flat things. Okay, so modeling. Technical artist is the person who bridges the gap between the programming team and the art team. They tend to be technical people who understand art. So they would do things like write shaders, write animation systems, write importing systems. Right, so they make the art basically work from the pure artist to the game. Environment artist does backgrounds, scenes, levels. Okay, very different skill to a character artist. Very rarely do you get somebody who's good at both of those things. There's reasons for this, because one of them thinks like an architect, the other person thinks like an animator. Right? Shader programmer. If his project's big enough, somebody would just write shaders. Does everyone know what a shader is? Yeah.
It's like lighting.
Yeah, it basically calculates the color of the dots coming back off the surface using things like normals. So it basically does a calculation. And that's how you get things like the glowing eyes. That would be a shader. There would be something called an emissive shader. You might have seen this in Unity. You can have emission turned on, and emission will actually make it project more light than it's receiving. Most lighting models just receive light and bounce it back again at varying intensities and colors. But emissive shaders actually emit light, and you'd write that. QA, quality assurance, making sure the game actually does what is expected of it. That could be different types of quality assurance. One could be game functionality testing, making sure the game actually works. The other one might be compliance testing, making sure that it actually will work on different devices and adheres to the guidelines of those app stores. Live service programmer. These are the people writing the servers, the logins, the multiplayer systems. Right, the databases to maintain all of these things. Gameplay programmer. The programmer who basically pulls all of the gameplay together to allow the character to move and navigate through things, pick things up, interact with objects, and send the data back to the server if it's a multiplayer game. Engine programmer, right, is the person who writes the graphics engine and the overall game engine. Right, the tools that sit on top of sometimes other tools to allow these things to work. And that would be things like allocating objects, allocating memory, making sure things are cached, right? Make so things are cached so they're quickly accessible versus they always have to allocate memory on the fly. Then you'd have a rigger on the art side. The rigger would actually put the skeleton together and actually animate the skeleton. They would actually not actually animate, it would actually put the skeleton together, and then you'd have an animator who would animate the skeleton. Right? And then a producer. Producer would make sure that everyone here is doing everything properly, and the producer also makes sure that this is actually going to meet the goal of being something they can sell, or something that will actually be fun and review well. So you can imagine, just for this one screen, there's so many different jobs. Okay? Now, the smaller the game is, the more times you get that this might be the same person, you know? These two jobs might be the same, or these three jobs might even be the same. If the team is really small, all of these jobs might be the same. But these jobs all still exist under the hood. All of these things have to be done for the game to work. And if you go in a large company, you know, I've got one here. This game here, Theme Park World. This was 40 people worked on this, right? That was 2 people. That was about 15 people, all doing different disciplines. Did I miss any roles? Any roles?
Maybe some, yeah.
Which ones?
I suppose if it's a modern game, you might have someone who is like an economy engineer.
Oh, good point. Yeah, really good point. Nowadays, with free-to-play, you told me you got into the business around the mobile time. Mobile changed everything, because we used to be in the days, we used to go this way. I'd give you this, you'd give me £39.99, and we'd be done. End of conversation, right? Come back next time when the sequel's ready. Nowadays, everything is continuous monetization. So effectively, every time you put a feature in, somebody needs to think, how do we make money out of this? If the game is free to play, how do we make money out of this feature? So the monetization and games design these days are very closely related, especially for mobile or any free-to-play game. Very good point. Okay, so thinking like a creator. Rolex watch, right? That's the way the creator would see it. Right? They would see all the bits inside the Rolex. Yeah? The consumer sees this, right? The creator sees that. And to become a creator, you've really got to start thinking like this. How do you take things apart? I could have probably foreshadowed my career, because typically when I got a present, I used to like getting technical things. You know, when I was young, I had Lego, the original, not Lego these days, but Lego just the plain bricks. I used to get little things like radio controlled cars and things like that. Most of them wouldn't survive for 3 days because I've taken them apart by the third day. I was more interested in how they worked and actually playing with them. So maybe that's why I ended up doing games. But again, as a creator, my advice to you is even now start thinking about how did they do this, or why did they do this way. And that's going to be the best sort of training montage for you actually doing this for real. Okay, games industry. So previously, 2000, this is really pre-mobile, right? Pre-mobile, everything was essentially physical media based. You had physical disc, like, for some bizarre reason, this always amuses me, that's still the save icon, right? Right? This is a 5¼ inch floppy disk. Who's ever seen one of these before? So physical media, and eventually these used to move into CDs, right? Like these. Games used to be sold on CDs and eventually DVDs, but it was physical, right? Physical goods. And nowadays, pretty much everything, even if you get physical disc, there's a really good chance. Who's bought a physical disc and then had to do a 600 gigabyte download afterwards? Yeah, pretty much everything is digital these days. So one of the things here is basically revenue models, pay before you play. So you had to pay before you could play. So it was all about getting people to get ready for wanting to play your game. You had a sort of like what we call a big bang launch, where you'd have a big launch and you try to get as many people playing the game as possible. But then you didn't really care what happened afterwards. There were no other monetization schemes. So nowadays it's really split up. There's obviously mobile business become huge. PC console business. Ironically, these days, PC nearly went away. Can anyone guess why PC nearly died as a platform?
Was it too expensive?
No, it's actually the opposite. Well, okay. Yes, it wasn't too expensive.
Was it outcompeted by mobile and like a PlayStation console?
Yes, but for a particular reason. Why did manufacturers stop making PC games?
I guess so they can just buy the console instead.
No, because console publishing is really expensive. They didn't really want PC.
Mobile games make more money.
I'll give you an example. Typically, the person would have a treasure chest, a cutlass, and a parrot on their shoulder. Piracy, right? So piracy was rife on PC because it was so easy to copy a CD or a DVD. So people were just copying the games. Effectively, there's a massive underground trade in copied games. Exactly what happened with music before Apple launched the Apple Music Store. And what the Apple Music Store did is actually locked music down and made it harder to copy. But beforehand, music MP3s were copied everywhere. The same happened to PC. And PC kind of languished until somebody found a way of making PC games less copyable, and that's the things like the Steam store, for example. They put copy protection on the games. So actually that's what made a PC viable again. So it's piracy that stopped it. And obviously you've got mobile. There's basically two dominant app stores, iOS and Android. And effectively, there you have a duopoly, which means it's like a monopoly with two players. There's only two ways you can get your game on a phone unless you jailbreak the phone. That's going through one of these stores. Although that may change because Apple have just had a court case against them. And nowadays, most of the revenue is pay as you play. So it's free to play. So the idea is you get more value out of customers as you play. On PC console, right, essentially, there's a lot of times there's a bit of an upfront payment for the first few levels, and then you have to pay more, or you pay for the core game, and then you have to buy extra things. We can buy extra things. So it's kind of a hybrid model. And typically, distribution is really online source. Although you still get physical media, the physical media these days isn't really worth anything other than collector's item, quite frankly. One thing that was really interesting in these days, if you put a game out, if I made this game here, and I made a physical disc and it had a bug in it I found out after release, it was really, really expensive because I had to recall all of the discs. They would be binned. I'd still have to pay Sony that 10 quid a shot for these discs, right? That's how much you had to pay Sony. So a third of the money went straight to Sony, the game, which is why the game's so expensive. And then I have to make the whole disc again. Nowadays it's much easier, you can fix it, right? You can fix it with online downloads. Unless you've really bricked the machine, you can typically fix it. So nowadays there's a lot of effort put in to make sure the games worked first time and continued working. And nowadays you can take much more of a sort of soft release strategy. You can release the beta version of the game and kind of get it right gradually. So again, that's changed the business quite a bit. And of course the other big deal is nowadays you've got so many people who can do this. When I made my first game was written in 6.502 assembly language. When I wrote my first game, the internet was 20 years away. Right? There was no internet. So there was no YouTube, there was no Googling things. If you wanted to know something, you'd go to a specialist bookshop and have to buy the book, which had to be imported from the States typically. My first programming book cost me £50. That was in 1982. It's probably more like £500 now, right? Had to be imported, it took 6 weeks to get here. And I was probably the only person I knew that had it. So it was actually quite hard to make games. So it actually, if you think about supply and demand, there was relatively little supply because very few people knew how to make games, but there was relatively quite a few people wanted to play them. Nowadays it's totally shifted. Nowadays the tools have made it so easy to make games, and relatively there's actually fewer people playing those games being made. Which is, I don't know if you've heard, there's a bit of a downturn in the games industry right now. That's really down to the fact there's too much supply and not enough demand for games. And only really good games make it. But the other thing is, as Paul points out, a lot of the revenue these days is after you've sold the original game. It's basically this, what we call a long tail of the game. So if you think about the launch, the peak, and then the tail is the monetization as the game's in the marketplace. One of the biggest examples of this is, who's played GTA? GTA. Shouldn't be playing it, it's an 18, but GTA has been in the market now for 12 years, right? 12 years?
Yeah.
12 years. They're still making money on it, which is just ridiculous if you think about it. They're still making money on GTA today after 12 years. And that's a real testament to great games design and great monetization strategies. Okay. So this is, I've given you the PDF for this, but there's some interesting things in the PDF about the types of games people play. And again, this is quite important to look at. This category here is relatively new, the brain puzzle game. You know, they're sort of like casual games, like, like Candy Crush type games. Okay. These games, racing, sports, adventure, they've always been around on console, and then obviously on desktop, on PC, you've got adventure, shooter, strategy. And this is roughly what people play. Now you can see from this here, the brain puzzle games are a large proportion of what people play on mobile. And what do you think? Do you think people who play these types of games, the sort of casual puzzle games, are the same people who would play first-person shooters? No, it's a different audience, right? It's a totally different audience. So this idea of one game that appeals to everybody is gone these days. The games are very much segmented, and they're very much different markets. So, similarly, people who play word games probably don't play adventure games. So again, when you're looking at making games, you need to think about what market do you want to serve. Now, just to say, the actual market itself is colossal. The video game market, this is a European study, but the US is also a colossal market. So actual money brought in by games is staggering. It's a very significant market. You can see nowadays the switch is almost entirely digital revenue, very little physical revenue, physical goods. So it's worth looking at what people spend money on, because I know most of you probably want to make games out of a hobby, but if you want to make it a career, it's going to be a very short career if your game doesn't sell. Because that's what pays the bills. You know, that's what pays for the Unity licenses, and that's what pays for the staff, and that's what pays for the coffee. So it's well worth looking at the market. One thing to think about, again, going back to this slide here, I was known for making games like this, right? Real-time strategy games. Real-time strategy game. Real-time strategy game. Real-time strategy game. That's not a game. The games I played for fun weren't that at all. I didn't play real-time strategy games for fun. I used to play first-person shooters for fun. An interesting anecdote is I've never made a first-person shooter. Despite making 40 games, I've never made a first-person shooter. Right? I've always made games I wouldn't naturally play myself. But I did immerse myself in playing these games for professional reasons, to understand how they work, understand what makes people tick, and why people play them. So you don't necessarily have to love the genre you're working in, because making games is a craft. It's a crafting process. You're crafting something. And we'll come back to the art part of that later on. Okay, so thinking about the difference between, what's the biggest difference between now and 2 years from now?
We'll find out in 2 years.
Yeah, that's one thing. Hindsight. You have the most amount of time now to get ready for finding a job. In 2 years' time, you have 2 years less. Right? So my advice is start thinking about how you'll actually approach, if you want to go into games business, start thinking about how you approach finding a job in 2 years, or if you go to university, maybe 5 years or 6 years. The sooner you start thinking about this, the more successful you'll be. The thing you have on your side today is more time than tomorrow. So keep that. Time is a precious resource, and you're talking to a person who's retiring soon, so I can tell you it's a precious resource. So my advice is all of these things may seem very abstract now, but there are lots and lots of things you can do right now that will have a massive impact later on, because the thing you're not going to get back is the time you didn't spend doing them. Okay, so I talk a bit about the state of the industry, right? So basically the games industry is prone to boom and bust behavior. It's kind of good, bad, it's seesaws, right? And I've seen a number of these things in my lifetime as a games person, right? From 87 to 94, 8-bit consoles, you know, home computers rule to start with. Home computers like the Commodore 64, the Atari ST, the BBC Micro. That's what dominated it. In America, the Apple IIe. Yeah, and then at the later stage, the PC Micro as well came out, the IBM PC. But in that period, less than 10 years, suddenly 8-bit consoles became dominant. Nintendo became very dominant. Sega became very dominant. So the skills you had making games for home computers did not immediately translate to 8-bit games on console. So the whole industry had to rejig. We call it a platform transition, right? Platform transitioning. So that was almost like a massive gear change, because all the things that did well for home computers didn't work for consoles. Because on a console, it was a fixed memory on the chip. It was all about getting everything to fit inside 32K or 64K. K, not meg or gig, K, kilobytes, right? Pretty much no memory whatsoever. It all had to fit. So it's all about fitting things into very, very small spaces. There was no extension thing you could plug into these consoles to give you extra RAM or extra ROM, read-only memory. Then later on, there were transitions from 8 to 16 to 32 bits. Now, they may just look like numbers, right? But every one of those came with different graphics capabilities, right? Towards the 32-bit era, suddenly 3D started becoming prevalent versus 2D, right? So sprites, 2D sprites, were suddenly replaced by 3D objects. That meant a whole bunch of artists had to learn entirely new skills, because they were used to drawing cartoon graphics like in 2D, and now to think in 3D and use 3D tools, which they've never used before. So that was a big shift here. Then the biggest shift, I think, was the basically pay before you play to mobile free-to-play model, which a lot of really large companies got caught out with, including Electronic Arts I used to work for. We just didn't know how to make mobile games. Right? I didn't know how to make a game for £250,000. Right? I couldn't make a game for less than 6 million. You know, because I had a team of 40 people saying, what do we do now, Richard? Or sometimes 100 people. You know, I couldn't think about running a team, going back to my roots and running a team with 3 people. I'd unlearned that skill of doing this, and that's what mobile was all about. So again, that was a massive, a lot of big companies took a massive hit here as mobile suddenly started becoming prevalent. Then obviously, COVID hit, right? Suddenly COVID, everyone was at home playing games. The games industry had stellar results because there was a captive audience of people wanting to be entertained sitting at home, right? And then post-COVID, suddenly everyone went back to work. So these studios were overstaffed, had too many people. They hired people at ridiculous salaries to get people on board. There were starting salaries of $250,000 a year offered to start-up programmers in San Francisco. That's not sustainable. So then there was a bust, right? And I think what we're seeing right now is that downturn, that post-COVID downturn, as lots of things get realigned and things get back to an actual reality. Because if you go back to the previous slide here, people have not stopped playing games. Right? There's still a ton of money to be made. It's just the industry needs to adapt to a new business model. And the new business model is that you can't just assume players will keep playing games. Who plays mobile games? Anyone play mobile games? You download a game. How long before you decide to move on and play something different? How long do you give it?
Till I'm finished.
How long?
Till I'm finished with the game.
Till you finish.
Yeah.
You play every game you download.
Yeah.
Okay, it's unusual.
Oh.
So, what if you don't? What if you sort of play a game and the first few levels are a bit boring? You keep persevering with it? I can tell you right now, the mass market doesn't. It's 90 seconds. Right? You have 90 seconds to convince the person to spend more time with the game on mobile for the mass market. Not necessarily the core gamers, but the mass market gamers will spend 90 seconds deciding if they're going to keep investing time into this game. Right? So you've got to be very, very good at this. And this is one of the things we're seeing right now is there's been a lot of investment in games. Some of the games have fallen flat on their faces. They've not sold as well as was promised, and I think that's a combination of the post-COVID, hit, as well as people kind of getting a bit bored with the same old stuff. A bit like who likes the Marvel universe? Marvel. Yeah, Marvel's getting a bit samey now, isn't it? They're just putting stuff out as Marvel properties, and you think, so hang on, this is the Marvel thing about the guy who once bumped into Iron Man at the chip shop. And he's now a superhero. That's the storyline of this one. That's kind of where it's going with that, right? So they're really just trying to milk the franchise, and people are getting sick of it. The same happens in games, right? A lot of franchises being over-milked. My guess is there'll be a boom again, right? And there'll be a bust again. It just will cycle. So don't worry too much about the current dip. Yeah.
Would you say the dip is mainly just due to originality? So like Marvel, for instance, is because they're straying away from the comic book stories because where it did well once in with consumers, it must do well always.
Well, I have my own theories about this, but I think one of the challenges is we now have so much information about what people do, right? Telemetrics, right? Which is basically knowing exactly how to play the game, what they play in games, what they buy, all of this intelligence, right, that we get by watching what people do. There's a bunch of executives who go, oh wow. We've got his new. We've got his new game dynamic. Here's the classic. Okay, we now know that when we look at people's buying patterns, they like red shoes, right? So we're going to make more games with red in them because people like red. Not necessarily, right? After some point, you get bored with red shoes and go, well, I want some purple shoes next time. And I think that's what's happening is they're using too much of this trend analysis and then saying, well. Because most games companies, they want safety, right? They want to be able to pay the bills and make a profit, right? So So they don't necessarily think originally. And if you think about being original is very dangerous, right? Because original doesn't necessarily mean good. It doesn't necessarily mean it resonates with people. And most things that are original, I would actually argue, are, if you imagine you've got a game imagine a game is the setting, right? Kind of, it's set on Mars, whatever. The type of gameplay, like what does the player do, okay? And say the physics behavior of the character, right? Three things, right? My guess is if you change all three of those to be something unlike something somebody's previously played before, it's going to fail. Because people are just going to go, I'm overwhelmed, I have no idea how to learn this. A classic case now, I'm learning Chinese, right? I'm overwhelmed with Chinese because I don't understand the basics yet. And that's, if you're surrounded with choice, you have somebody who says it's just too much hassle, right? On the other hand, if you keep two of those the same, so there's familiarity, and you change the third, you've got a good chance. So I actually think originality is all about original twists, right? Original twists. It's the sprinkling of onion, crispy onion, on the bland cabbage that gives it that tang that makes cabbage tasty. It's that twist. And I think that's the best way to apply originality. So I would apply it carefully, sparingly, but I also wouldn't break every single thing the players ever experience, because that's really dangerous, especially control method. Controls are motor memory. Right? You're probably too young to drive, right? Does anyone drive yet? You drive, yeah? Can I ask you a question about driving? Yeah. You drive manual or automatic?
Manual.
Manual, okay. When you start driving manual, right? And your first lesson, what do you think about most? Do you think about the clutch or the destination?
At first, personally, it's destination.
Right.
Always.
So you're cool with the clutch. You're cool with the biting point on the clutch and getting it not to stall the car.
Not until I'm fully in the car, then I'm thinking about it. I'm like,
yeah,
in there.
So honestly, I think for me it was clutch, right? I no longer think about clutch at all, right? I think destination, because the clutch is motor memory. My brain knows automatically which pedals to push in what sequence. I'm no longer thinking, I don't even think braking anymore, right? There's something in my head that I can see an object, and before I've consciously registered, I'm already on the brakes, right? Motor memory. Controls are motor memory. So mess with controls at your peril, because you're messing with motor memory. It's really hard to unprogram motor memory, right? On the other hand, other things you can unprogram, right? You can sort of say, for example, in this particular game, I'm sort of used to a character that I can just replay the level and the character comes back to life, right? For the next play. I can do something called permadeath for the character, right? Which means when you die, you die. And after a few times, you go, actually, that's just very different. I can't take as many risks as I would have taken in the previous gameplay. Because if I die, I die, right? But you kind of get it, that's not a motor memory thing. It's more a case of a conscious thing. So be careful with motor memory. So originality has to be very channeled, right? And my advice is keep it narrow and keep it very deep, and then test it with people. Test it not with yourself, test it with people who have never seen it before. We'll come back to that in a minute though. But yeah, originality is lacking. Most big companies if you look at the very large companies, most of the creative people in the companies are several layers beyond the top these days. So there might be 4 or 5 layers in the company that have never made a game personally. That was very different in my day. In my day, the people at the top of the company were the people who made games and just got better and better, and eventually became promoted. But nowadays, most people running companies, their focus is the stock market, in how well the stock does for that games company. So that's kind of a disconnect here. But it doesn't mean you can't be original. Some of the big successes were really original games. So keep that in mind as well, So originality is good, but you've got to temper it. Just making something different doesn't make it better. And also better is not better in your head, it's better in the player's head. Okay, so here's your choice, right? Who's seen the Matrix? Well, we're seeing the Matrix. Basically, the Matrix is structured like a video game. It's literally a movie in video game format. There's lots of really good little games tips in the Matrix. In this particular scene, Neo has a choice between the blue pill and the red pill. So in terms of jobs, what this means is you have a choice here of getting in early, or waiting to get more qualifications and more skills and getting in later. Getting in early, I mean getting basically any job you possibly can inside a games company. Testing, testing, answering the phones, tech support, right? You might get a smaller games company, you might get a job, assistant producer, help, some sort of helping role. And nobody's going to say to you, unless it's your own company, nobody's going to say to you, here's 100 million, make your first game, and if it doesn't go well, don't worry about it. Right? So this idea of getting a job, getting in the door, right, versus waiting to build more skills, possibly getting a degree, right? Those are the choices that might be wrapping around in your heads. Right? What's better? And the answer is that there's no really right answer to this. It's a very personal thing to do. I personally, and this is a long time ago, I was doing my degree at the University of London, and I was supposed to go back to I was supposed to start my degree, but I actually enjoyed my job at the Video Palace so much, I essentially dropped out of university, which is probably not so much the same educational establishment, but it has a happy ending. So I dropped out of university because I enjoyed my job so much, because I was working in the shop, I was making games eventually, we started the company, and eventually I did my degree at the Open University whilst I was working. And it worked for me because by the time I found the educational experience too abstract, I was a hands-on person. And the irony was, after 2 or 3 years of programming, suddenly the computer science made sense to me, because I'd already been doing it. I then learned the theory of all the things I've been doing already anyway. I learned all the mathematics behind the 2D and 3D I was doing. So actually my degree made a lot more sense for me, having done the things first. That's just a personal thing. I know other people's work the other way, but I did my degree later in life. But you've got to really ask yourself, honestly, what do you want out of both of these scenarios? My advice would be, the piece of paper you get on a degree is worth nothing, right? It's worth nothing. It's everything you do getting that piece of paper that's worth it. Are you going to make lots of games on that course that will be good portfolio pieces, right? Where each portfolio piece tells a story about why you should be in the games business. Are you going to learn the technical skills to do things competently without having to refer to YouTube? So things become second nature to you. Right? Because watching YouTube videos only get you this far. They don't give you the whole package. Because the whole package is to get this intuition about how things work. Right? And a YouTube video always tells you the solution, it doesn't necessarily tell you the methodology and why you should be doing things a certain way. This makes a lot of sense if you're trying to figure out what those patterns are in making games in those disciplines, right? How do you break down an animation if you're an animator, or how do you break down some gameplay? And then I would actually say you should spend all your 3 years of university, or 4 years if it's a sandwich course, I would actually say spend every single day making portfolio pieces and handing them in as coursework, right? Because by the end of it, you'll have a portfolio that's the same portfolio as somebody who's got 2 years experience in the industry. So your goal for this should be, end up with a portfolio that looks like somebody's been doing this for a living for 2 or 3 years. But if that's not your end goal for this, unless you really want to be in some exotic place where the university is, I wouldn't bother, quite frankly. I would try and find another way into games companies. The good news about the first one is, once you get into a company, the biggest thing is getting through the door. It's a bit like this building. You've got to get past reception, right? Once you pass reception, the rest of navigation is easier. Once you're inside the company, you're going to be talking to the people that will help you along. You're already one of them at that point. Like you're insider, it's much easier to progress inside a company. And also certain jobs are never advertised. Right? There's lots of jobs that are homegrown jobs. For example, it's very rare to see assistant producers advertised. Because typically an assistant producer is somebody who's very good in QA, who's basically exhibited some traits of a producer, right? And they get spotted internally and suddenly this is the producer's created. They don't have to advertise for jobs, they internally promote it. So I think which one of these you do depends on you. They're both hard work, right? And getting promoted is hard work, but sometimes being within a company is better than being outside the company. And most importantly, for all of these things, you should start networking as soon as possible. Make connections, ask people for advice, go to the game jams, go to Develop. Develop in Brighton, it's on every summer. A big game show, the expo is free. You can literally go and get a ticket and go for free. Right? All the games companies there, collect business cards, talk to people. Kind of get yourself into the industry in your heads. You'll be more successful. Any questions on this? Full disclosure, I teach degree courses on games degrees. So I teach both at master's level, I've also taught at undergraduate level. So I would give you the same advice if you came to an open day. Right? Although they'd probably fire me for doing that, but I would give you the same advice. You've got to have a real purpose for doing this. It's a big ask. It's 3 years, is a lot of money, but you've really got to get something out of it. And don't get me wrong, I know lots of people got something out of it, but they focused. Okay. Portfolio. Everything you do, every piece of coursework you hand in, think of it like a portfolio piece. So when you start having a portfolio site, a portfolio site would be something like a Wix site where you can showcase your skills as a maker. Now, I'll go right back to the creator versus the consumer. Physical object. Let's take this object, right? Imagine I modeled this as a 3D model. Right, and I showed it on my website as a modeling skill demonstration. The first thing a professional would want to know about this is what?
Why you made it?
Not necessarily.
How it's used.
Oh, good. Actually, why you made it a good question. Yes, I'll come back to that. Yep. How it's used. Hey, I'm showing you this piece of art.
What is it?
It's a remote.
But that's what they probably They probably want to know what is it, what's its purpose.
Yeah, so for example, first question is, can you push the buttons or not? Because if I can push the buttons and the buttons have to move, I have to model it totally differently from it being a static object. Right? Yes? I noticed a little light here. Does the little light come on when I press the button? Because if it does, I need an emissive shade on this object. Right? Look at the back. Can I ever open this to get the batteries out? And if I do I see the batteries inside? That's what a professional would want to know, whether you thought about this and you thought about how it's going to be used in the game. Because if I model this, right, the way it's actually built, it's going to be tens of thousands of polygons. My frame rate will suck, right? I'll probably get fired for doing this when it's just a throwaway object that game character finds inside the game. Same token, if I haven't asked the right questions before starting modeling this, right, is use, when they start putting in the game, we can, well, hang on a second, the guy picks it up and he presses his button to open the door and the light doesn't come on. So if they want to know from a portfolio piece what your motivation was in building it, right? What was the use case? How will it be used? Is it a polygon exercise? Can you model this in 100 polygons and still make it look good? Right? At what distance will the player see it? Because if I see it from here, I need low-res textures, but if I'm really close up and I can actually see the little striations in the textures, I want high-res textures. And that's just for one object. And really good portfolios actually highlight this. Right? They highlight the steps you've taken to build this. And that's what makes a difference between somebody who's got 3 or 4 years experience in the field and somebody who's a novice who's learned through YouTube. I go back to this, think of this as the Rolex. You're really trying to deconstruct what it is. So think like a creator, communicate like a professional. What I mean by this is, if I wanted to do this, say for example my first model here, has anyone heard of Sculpt 3D? It's a sculpting package. You can basically sculpt objects by using like sculpting tools, right? It makes very high polygon objects that are not necessarily good for putting into a game straight away. What's the process called for taking a high polygon object and making it low polygon? Just fewer polygons, right? I've made an object with fewer polygons. What would a professional call it?
I'm so happy when all my students would know the answer.
Sorry? Retopologizing, right? You start talking like a professional. Whoever looks at your website, your portfolio, thinks you are a professional. You talk like them, right? So, go back to the chef picture, right? There is not a single chef in the world who would call that thing that was poured on the meat gravy, right? Because gravy is what you make in the kitchen out of granules, right? That's juice, right? So speak like a chef or speak like a professional, and they will believe you are a professional. So learn the professional terms, retopologizing, right? Like readjusting the normals, right? All of those things are professional terms to use. Right? Making sure vectors are coincident, to make sure that corners are actually the same point in space rather than two overlapping points. Because if they're overlapping points, you see a gap when it rotates because of rounding errors in the graphics engine. You start talking like a professional, they believe you are a professional. Which then gets you neatly past that bit where you see all of the entry-level jobs. Who's looked at jobs in games business? Entry-level programmer, right? 2 years experience required. I mean, how ridiculous is that? How will you have 2 years experience for the entry-level position? They don't mean the 2 years. What they really mean is, if you talk like us, we'll believe you're one of us. So learn the lingo. Always think pipeline. Pipeline is how something ends up in the game. So this may start off as an object that's sculpted in Sculpt 3D or some 3D sculpting package. Eventually it has to go into games, it has to be turned into triangles, polygons, right? Some of them may have animations. There's a whole pipeline to doing this. Right? There's a pipeline for texturing, there's a pipeline for normal mapping. Learn the pipelines, learn the terminology in the pipelines. And with most of these things, show deliberation. Show you're doing this deliberately. It's not an accident you're doing this. You have a real path, right? Show deliberation in everything you do. Okay. I really encourage you to do some game jams. Right? If you ever have a chance to go on a good game jam, do a game jam. Game jams are where you basically get a limited amount of time to make a whole game. Ridiculously short amount of time. You might get 2 days to make a whole game from start to finish. There's normally a theme to the game jam, right? And you have to make a game. But there's nothing quite like it for problem solving on the fly and working as a team. You'll realize a lot about yourself doing this. You realize a lot about working with other people and relying on other people to do things. It's a really good experience. And I think that sort of thing will kind of help you to work with tight deadlines. It also helps you to adapt. It helps you succeeding in shipping something because there's an end product, right? And then you get to see other people play it. And then you really got to go, oh God, I don't get it, do they? Right? Oh, we should have done this. Oh, I wish we'd put an extra point. I wish we'd just made the exit glow slightly red so they would know where the door is. You know? You see all of these things. And you close the whole circle. And it allows you to do this very quickly. You know, within a week, you're going to have some really good feedback and have built something. Good learning curves. They do loads of these. Cool. Do you do the game jams here?
Yeah, we do one in the summer with a waiting for some bars.
It's really well worth doing. You try and get some industry people in to kind of brief you on the game jam and do the judging. That typically get professional feedback on some of these games might be useful. And then also, you know, most important thing when people are telling you why your game sucks, what's the most important skill you can have at that point? Is it good right hook or what's yeah, shut up and listen, right? It's such an experience because how would you find out that a game that you've shipped to the public isn't any good? 0 sales, right? It's so good to have somebody actually be in a room and somebody's telling you why something isn't going to work. And it's incredibly painful to listen to the feedback. Okay, but if you're sitting there listening, processing why they're saying this, oh, if we did this and this and this, right, we can change this behavior. Then you test it again. Next feedback might be better. So learn to listen. This adapting thing. and this adapting thing. I'll give you an example. One of the teams at Goldsmith years ago, one of my students, they were on a team, and they were going to do a little 2D game, like 2D adventure game. Nothing special about it, right? It was just an average little adventure. But they fell out with the artist. So the artist got so annoyed with them that he stormed away and never came back. That's after 3 hours on this game jam. Right? They went, what do we do now? Do we just abandon this? And said, no, let's not bother. We'll just do little paper sketches on pieces of paper. We'll cut them out and we'll photograph them and make cell animations on this. They won because of that. If the artist had stayed, they would have had an average game. Their game looked like nobody else's game. Right? That was the innovation. It was a total accident, and they went with it, and it worked. Right? So just keep that in mind. So that adaptation thing is really, really important. Okay, team project. Right, so it's now time for you to do some talking. So I'd like you to come up with a game idea and pitch it. And there will be prizes. So, and I'll give you feedback. So you should have some slides, yeah? Some slides.
I'll have a little chat here.
So
on the Google Classrooms, folks, there is essentially like game design template that you can fill in. So what we'd like you to do is to basically group together with some people around you. If you don't know these people, even better. And then just see if you can come up with a game concept that like fits that. So again, you'll find that on the Google Classroom streams. Obviously, because you're not a game student, you'll have to have a look at your friends' screen there. But yeah, have a look, see what you can build.
just let's do it nice and quick. So maybe give yourself 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And by all means, raise your hand and I'll give you advice if you give me a. It's okay to start with a game that you know, and just do a version of that game with a slight twist to it, maybe. You know?
So it's on the Classroom stream, folks. There's essentially a frame that you could use to fill in. What's that, sorry? Gimmick platformer. Can't go wrong with the gimmick platformer. I'm just going to pause my recording, guys. Just bear with me. Hope it's still been recording. It has been.